Good evening, everybody out in Facebook and YouTube land. This is Tim, and tonight I'm going to come to you with the Close Encounters of the Biblical Kind, Part 3. And this is by far the greatest close encounter in human history that people have with something that comes down out of the sky. And this comes from the book of Exodus. Many of you have probably seen the movie, The Ten Commandments. It didn't really touch on what we're going to touch on tonight. It showed you things about it, but not exactly what we're going to cover tonight. This is really going to be really an overview of what happened back in those days. Obviously, the children of Israel go down into Egypt at the time of Joseph. They're taken captive eventually by the Egyptians and made to be slave labor for the Egyptians. Moses comes along. He was saved miraculously as they're out to kill all the Hebrew children, and his mom puts him in a basket in the river. He's found by the queen's daughter, and then his mom ends up caring for him out of all that. And you know, most of you know the story from the movie The Exodus by Cecil B. DeMille, and Charlton Heston obviously starred in that. What we're going to look at tonight is what happened when God came down in Exodus 19. Everybody's familiar with the Ten Commandments, or should be. You try to keep most of all of them, but probably can't. But regardless, right before the Ten Commandments are given in Exodus 20, you pick it up in Exodus 19. And the Lord tells Moses, I'm going to come to thee in a thick cloud. Be ready against the third day. Everybody stay back away from this, because if you don't, you're going to get killed. So this is kind of an interesting thing. Think about it from a human perspective. God tells you cloud's going to come down. You need to back off or you're going to get killed. We've seen plenty of clouds in our lifetime, so this is obviously something different. But the strange thing is that the Lord himself is coming down in this cloud, so it's really not a weather cloud. So if you want to turn to the book of Exodus chapter 19, that'd be a good place to start. And I'm just going to give you a overview, and I'm going to read from a work by Patrick Cook. He had a website called the Bible UFO Connection, and this is where I get most of my stuff from for this study. He just did a wonderful job, all scripture, but he also takes a look at it from a human perspective as well. And then he just adds up some basic things, which I think you're going to find, gee, I never really thought about that before. So here it goes. And this is called The Greatest Encounter in History, the greatest close encounter in history, the Exodus. And this is from the work of Patrick Cook. Patrick is deceased, and I was able to print off most of his website before it was taken down. So here it goes. A little bit of water before I start. And I'm just going to read you this because this is just the best way to do it. There's just so many things he has in here, and I'm going to highlight just a few of them. So here we go. This close encounter starts with a conversation from a glowing vehicle on the ground, follows the high-tech harassment of the reluctant Pharaoh and the Hebrews' flight from Egypt, Moses' entry into the vehicle, and records the 40-year wanderings of the nation of Israel as it is directly led by an aerial guidance. Scores of descriptions and encounters with flying vehicles, advanced technology, and space-age weaponry are recorded during this journey. This writing covers specific instances of this encounter, but a complete read of the book is worthwhile. Almost the entire book of the Exodus is a description of the world's largest and longest close encounter event. Now, this goes on, we know, for 40 years. And here he starts the next paragraph, an incredible number. The world record for number of witnesses and length of encounter must certainly be held by the Exodus event. While most people do know about Ezekiel's wheels and Elijah's whirlwind, few consider the incredible experiences of those who participated in the Exodus from Egypt as a major close encounter. Biblical historians accept estimates. Again, biblical historians accept estimates of the number of Hebrews that left Egypt with Moses as from about 700,000 to 1 million. Added to that number are the Egyptian refugees from the disaster that had just occurred and others following this huge entourage out of a devastated Egypt. That could swell the number of travelers on the Exodus to between 1.5 and 2 million. Now, you might have heard of the mixed multitude, so that would be included in there. So you got anywhere from 1.5 million to 2 million people coming out of Egypt, being constantly overshadowed, sustained, and led by a huge flying object. This would be the thick cloud that God's in. At the beginning of the journey, this massive group of people was saved from the pursuing Egyptian army by this vehicle and fed daily and provided water for 40 years. At times, this vehicle would halt and hover over this group for months, providing shade during the day and light at night. The group would not travel if the vehicle was not moving forward. And I'll give you those verses in a little while. And you will find these verses in the Bible. So everything he's saying here, right online. At the beginning of the journey, this massive group of people was saved from the pursuing Egyptian army by this vehicle. Oh, I'm sorry. We covered that. 2 million people walking 10 abreast. So you got 2 million people walking, 10 in a row with 6 feet between the rows, would extend for about 250 miles. Even if they doubled up or tripled up or whatever, you've got a very, very long caravan. You talk about the caravans coming up from Central America to the United States. This well overshadowed that. So again, 2 million people walking 10 abreast with 6 feet between rows would extend for about 250 miles. An interesting estimate of just what the basic survival needs of such a large group of people gives a perspective on how massive an operation this must have been. It would require 1,000 tons, that's 2 million pounds of food every day just to ward off starvation. They needed 2 million pounds of food a day. There were no Walmart shopping centers. There were no Hy-Vees. They didn't have Amazon. Here we go. 2 million pounds of food every day just to ward off starvation. And we know from Scripture that there was plenty to eat. To do this would require the equivalent of a freight train, a mile long, to deliver the food every day. Add to that a bare minimum of 5 million gallons of water per day, and there were no soda fountains. And that train would extend beyond the horizon, and this went on every day for 40 years. Physical laws altered. Another little known and astonishing aspect of the Exodus event is found not in the book of Exodus, but in Deuteronomy. Quote, "The raiment waxed not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. That's Deuteronomy 8:4. And again, it's repeated in Deuteronomy 29:5. "And I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes are not waxen old upon you, and thy shoe is not waxen old upon thy foot." Amazingly, these verses are saying the clothes and shoes of those in the Exodus traveling group never wore out in 40 years of constant use. And the phrase, "neither did thy foot swell," certainly seems to indicate that the health of this great number of travelers also being maintained in extraordinary ways during that 4-decade period. Okay, so and that's probably related to the manna that they ate, I would imagine, because it says he opened the clouds of heaven, and I would presume he's talking about the ships dropped the clouds of heaven, or dropped the manna, and the people ate the food. This was angels' food. Angels are eternal beings. And so whatever food they were eating had the nutrition to sustain them and keep them very, very healthy. All right. The beginning of the 40-year Exodus, and only a quick thing about the food there and everything. Healing of wounds, relief from chronic ailments, and other physical alterations are often reported by contactees. And of course, these people would have had contact with God, the encounter there in the cloud. The beginning of the encounter, he appears to Moses in a burning bush, seemed to be bramble on fire, but was not being consumed. This is in Exodus 3, verses 2 and 3. And Moses says, "I'm going to turn aside and see this wonder." And God calls to him out of the bush, and come down here. In the 16th chapter of Exodus, the close encounter begins in the wilderness of sin. The people were beginning to question whether they were just on a wild goose chase and would die of hunger in the middle of nowhere. And the Lord reveals to Moses they will now begin to feed the people in 2 ways: by driving wild game into the encampment in the evening and providing bread, manna, in the morning. As Aaron was telling this to the people, a vehicle appeared at that very evening. Flocks of quail covered the camp. The next morning, manna appeared on the ground in quantities more than enough to satisfy everybody's hunger. This happened every day for 40 years. As the manna had to be eaten before the next morning or it would rot, with a specific exception of double quantity, they were required to gather on the day before the Sabbath, because on the Sabbath, the manna would not appear. And there it goes. And it came to pass that at evening, quails came up and covered the camp. In the morning, the dew lay around the host. And when the dew that was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness, there lay a small round thing as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. That's Exodus 16, 13, and 14. Manna is not a noun, most might assume, but actually comes from the Hebrew word man, pronounced man, meaning eventually whatness, so to speak. So that's why they question about it. So they call it, what is it? Psalm 78, 24, 25 to be the key verse. And rain down manna upon them to eat and give them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. All right. So that's what we have going on there. So supernatural feeding of the people. Again, they needed 10 or 2 million pounds of food every day for 40 years. So quite the job they're done. Coming on here. In the 19th chapter of the Exodus, the people experience a prolonged encounter with a great craft. About 2 weeks after the food miracle and the warding off and an unsuccessful attack by Amalek, the chief of an Idumean tribe at Rephidim, the defeat of Amalek is a miracle itself, and it all seemed to be Moses using some form of psychokinesis in Exodus 17:10 through 12. The Lord demands a strict perimeter be established around Mount Sinai where the vehicle is about to land, and the people are warned that breaching the perimeter could cause death to humans and animals. The craft is so huge it causes the 1 million+ people witnessing it to tremble at the bright lights and terrible sounds coming from it. Moses goes up the mountain and into the vehicle, and the Lord reinforces his warning about the deadly perimeter. Moses goes back down the mountain, warns the people, and the Lord begins to speak directly to them, giving him his commandments from the vehicle. These commandments continue from the 20th through the 23rd chapters of Exodus. In the 24th chapter, after the vehicle has been on the mountain for 6 days, the Lord calls Moses back up into the vehicle where he remains for 40 days, receiving instructions for a mobile tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and other items from models Moses sees in the vehicle in verse 40. The Lord gives minute details of everything in the tabernacle and rituals and restrictions to be performed in it, and personally writes it all down on stone tablets with his own hand. And Moses is transformed and the journey begins. While Moses is gone, the attention span of the people proves to be very short, and they build a pagan altar, which Moses breaks in anger. After this discretion is dealt with, Moses returns to the vehicle, and the Lord makes him rewrite the edicts, and he brings the new tablets to the people. Moses' face is glowing so intensely after the prolonged meeting with the Lord that the people are afraid to come near him, and he's forced to cover his face with a veil. See, they got masks back in those days too. Well, Moses did. Moses oversees the building of the tabernacle and the ark, and the vehicle leads the Hebrew nation through the wilderness for the next 40 years. So that's kind of the introduction to the Exodus. That's probably different than you've ever heard it explained before. And this is a great work, again, done by Patrick Cook. And he has some books out. You can find them on Amazon and order those if you like. I'm going to be coming through his material on this. And as you see, the Close Encounters of the Biblical Kind. So we're about 15 minutes into this one. So I'm going to break it off here. So you can go back and take a re-listen to it, write down the verses that I give you, and go study them out for yourself. But we're going to come through some more verses describing what this cloud does across the 40 years in the next part. Thanks for joining me.